Hey, y'all, and welcome to the latest and greatest episode of the Dads in the Class podcast. Of course, you know me, it's Dion the Glad Dad, here with the number one podcast discussing family engagement and fatherhood engagement in the education of our children. I got a special guest. This is episode number 7. Y'all been rocking with us for 7 episodes. Glad to be here. Glad to bring this show back, and just glad that y'all continue to ask for more content. So, got a real dope guest on the podcast today. Somebody that I have known for a very long time. Somebody that is doing some really, really great work in the field of literacy, in the field of education, in the field of teaching the babies, which is what I believe it says on her shirt. Just all sorts of real. Oh, teach the truth. Just doing all sorts of really, really dope things out here. She is the executive director and founder of Clever Communities in Action. We'll dive into that. But she goes by the name of Starr Armstrong. Welcome, Starr, to the show. Hey, Starr, how are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Glad to have you on the show. Like you said, it's been a long time since we have had a discussion. So I had to bring you on the podcast just because I wanted to talk about not only the work that you have done in the past, but also the work that you guys are putting up in the future, because I know there's a lot of good things, and I know this is something that you have been working on with your organization. And before you even started your organization, you have been working in the field of literacy and in the field of teaching the babies for a very long time. So let's start talking about the moment that sparked the creation of Clever Communities in Action.
Okay, that is great. And I just want to say shout out to all your viewers, and to you, and congratulations on the 7th episode. They say that's a divine number. So I'm glad to be here on episode number 7. If we're gonna talk about what got me into that, let's see how far back we're gonna go. My granny, my dear sweet maternal granny, taught me to read at the young age of 3. On both sides of my family, I'm originally from Alabama, and I'm the
Mhm.
granddaughter of freedom fighters on both sides of my family. And so when Granny taught me to read at 3, I was a voracious reader. I was reading and writing at a young age, and I was taking down books. Okay, like I was reading like nobody's business. Y'all remember that Book It Club from back in the day? Your girl stayed with a pizza, a personal pan pizza. All right, I just love to read. I liked reading biographies. I liked reading about Black history and Black historical figures. But the time came where, I was into fiction and I wanted to read those chapter books. And back then it was Sleepover Friends, it was the Babysitter's Club. And as much as I adored those books and liked hearing about the stuff that they got into, it was very obvious, sometimes painfully obvious, that those girls did not look like me or my family or my friends. So by the time I came of age, there was more variety in Black children's literature. Nothing like it is now, but definitely more than it was as when I was a child. So I was on a mission to make sure that Black children and parents were exposed to books where our babies could see themselves represented positively. So my nonprofit started out with a book drive in which annually we would raise money to put Black children's books into Title I elementary schools. And that grew to where we have placed thousands of books in the Title I elementary schools in Hampton Roads and even in Flint, Michigan after the Flint water crisis. And so we have, many more programs since then. But that was the start with understanding the importance of reading, and knowing how much that shaped my life, and wanted to make sure that all of our children were exposed to that and that parents understood the importance of that as well.
Dope, dope. Now, your organization places a strong emphasis on culturally affirming literature. How do you think that this type of content can impact a young reader's sense of identity and self worth, especially as someone who, like you said, you didn't have those images growing up?
Well, fortunately for me, I did not have the images, but I had my family. I had this what what the stories of what went on in my family, what my family was involved in, and what my granny put in front of me. But the reason why that is extremely important is because a lot of times, if we don't see something and if we don't see ourselves in something, we will begin to feel like that it's other. It's not part of us. It's not something that for us. And the worst thing that can happen is for Black children to feel like that reading or literacy is someone else, is something else. Books are not only possibly for other people, but even if I like reading, protagonists, antagonists, stories are something that belongs to other people. People like me don't belong in literature. People like me don't belong in books. So it's important that our children understand that literacy is us, that literature is us, that reading is us, and also to see people, characters that look like them, that they can identify with, that pique their interest in all different types of genres. And so it's important to have books that are like whimsical and fun, and there's a dragon in my closet. It's important to have books that affirm our children's existence. I love my hair. I love my beautiful skin. I love these things about myself. It's important to learn about our history and culture. You know, the cliche thing is if we don't learn, we're doomed to repeat it. But also, I feel like a lot of us as adults, we have a lot of complaints about ways, directions in which we see the world is going. And if we don't have our young people being aware of who did what and what we've been up against, and them taking on the mantle and starting this at a young age, then the changes that we desire to see, they're not going to happen. Like it's going to be a hard stop. Like if we're not teaching our children these things, to be proud of who we are and the sense of responsibility that we have, and that's a beautiful thing, then where are the changes coming from? Like they're just gonna fall down from the sky. And so I get really excited talking about Black children's literature because it's a tool for learning that can be applicable under so many different topics.
Mm. Now you talk about how the world is changing, and one of the ways the world is changing is what we're seeing now is a lot of states, or some states, not a lot, mainly one, uh, they're starting to ban certain books, right? And certain books that we might have grown up on, or certain books that we might have been able to experience as young people ourselves back in our day. Those books are being, added to the banned book list, so to speak. How do you think what you're doing and the work that you're doing can counteract that, and how can parents counteract that who want to have their children reading culturally affirming books? Like what can we as adults do to counteract a lot of the foolishness that we're seeing with these banned books?
So one thing about this is it's bringing an issue to the forefront that has been important for a while, because it's not really like the books that include us, that are written by us, were promoted like they should have been anyway. There are a lot of Black people who could go all the way from kindergarten to graduate in high school before banned books and not even be exposed to Black authors, not being exposed to Black books. So now everybody is talking about it. And so the books being banned in the schools, the responsibility of us as parents, as community people, is to make sure that we create spaces. And if we're not able to create the spaces, that we find the spaces that are already doing this, in which there is this environment for learning and reading. That is one thing that obviously Clever Communities in Action is doing. But as parents, as people who care about this, then we have the ability to purchase these books ourselves, check out these books in places where they're not banned, and to teach this. And like I said, this is something that is extremely important anyway, because a lot of the books that are there that are not being banned, that were there before, we're reading those books, children are reading those books, and there's no context within that. And so the message that is given, because it's also interesting, not surprising, but with all the racist literature that has been, put in front of us for decades, there were no book bans on that. But now that there is an emphasis on culturally affirming literature, on teaching the truth, Now it's like bookman. So as with all things, we need to be proactive. And
Mhm.
one of the things about having, little ones, whatever their age is, from little ones to teen little ones, it causes us to have to step our game up in a lot of ways. So even if you got to go and get the cliff notes, but put the books in the home, have the conversations. We can't rely on the public school system to teach our children what needs to be taught anyway. It can be a supplement, but we create the importance at home. I'm looking at, your bookcase in the background. So that means that there's an environment where your children see books, and that's
Mhm.
normal. And if they get curious, they can go on that shelf and pull a book down and start reading it. Or you guys can sit down in there and pull a book down and read it together. But normalize having books in the home, normalize devices off and reading time at home.
Right. I agree. And, as someone who has been on the forefront of this movement for a very long time with the Read to Lead initiative, I know that's the cornerstone of a lot of the work that you do. Talk a little bit about how that program has evolved over, I believe, 11 years or so, and how it's impacted the communities that you've been serving.
So initially, again, that started out as the youth book drive, and it was every time I tell this story, I have to shout out my dermatologist, Dr. Quarles. So, I tell you, I get really excited about Black children's literature. And so one day I'm at my dermatologist and I'm just talking to him about what I do. And, he's into it. We're chopping it up and everything. And so then he ends up just randomly shooting me an email about exactly, Dr. JL. But he ends up sending me an email about an African American read-in at Chesterfield Academy in Norfolk. And I was like, I've never heard of an African American read-in, but it sounds dope.
Mm.
So I'm going, and I'm leaving work and I'm going to this. So I went, and it was really beautiful. See, it was yeah, I think it was in February during Black History Month. And the children put on a lot. They put on performances and everything, and I really enjoyed it. But as I was looking around the library, I was like, this library does not have enough Black children's books to my liking. So what can I do about it? And this was back before, we're all used to crowdfunding now, but I found something called fundraiser. We're talking about in 2011. And it
Mhm.
was a way where, I had the blog site back then and everything. And it was like people outside of the country who were supporters, as well as people all around the country, could donate money. So I said, I want to raise money to put these books into these school libraries. And people just started donating money. They just started donating. And that was the first time we were able to put like close to 100 books into Chesterfield Academy and into PB Young. When I first went there, I was so excited leading up to this. And on the way, we were recording this, and on the way in there, I was like, wait a minute, I'm excited, but this is not an iPad. This is not a video game. What if I
Mhm.
get in there and the children have like a lackluster response? What if they're just like, okay. So this
Right.
was like the prototype of it. And we go in there, I talk to the AP, and what we do is spread all the books out on this big desk she had in her office. She calls in some fourth and fifth graders. They come in, she explains what Clever Communities in Action is doing, and I'm standing there like, those babies came in and looked at those books. They were like, wow,
Mhm.
this is amazing. And they're picking up the books and going through the books and just having like the time of their lives. And what I remember the book fair felt like for me, but it wasn't Black books. And so one of the babies even asked me for my autograph, which I think was amazing because I brought books. And so, that showed that our children still get excited about that. And every year from that point on, when we do it, it's a big presentation that we do in the media center or the gym. And it's grown into where we bring in community partners and have guest readers. And we have the children move around in stations with different genres and topics, and it's interactive. And it always encourages media specialists to be, intentional about the books that they that they select. We also go back and do activities at the schools with some of the books that we donated. But we always get to see the children being excited. Like they're literally, when they're coming in the library and they see all the books lined up, they're like, can we get in? Can we get in? And then there's always a child or two or three after we donate these books, they have to be rotated into the system, into the media center. And there's always a child who is like trying to hold on to a book. Like, I want this book now. I want to take it now. And I'm always like to the media specialist, can you please write his or her name down and make sure that they get the book? And I don't think I put that book over here in front of me, but one of the main ones is this book about Malcolm X when he was a child. And it has a very striking cover. And it's always a little boy who grabs that book and is just like not wanting to let the book go. And so yeah, that, you know, that's the origin of it. That's watching the impact that it has on the children, seeing how the media specialists, a lot of times they learn about titles that they weren't aware of, and the conversations we have around intentionality when we select the books for the children. I'm glad to see that in some places it's getting better. When we first started out, a lot of the libraries really were like lacking.
And you know, I'm some would say I'm fortunate enough, I don't know, depends on who you ask, to have kids on two separate sides of the age spectrum. One is a sophomore in college and one is a kindergartner. So I'm old enough to remember when my 19-year-old was starting school, there weren't a lot of culturally affirming books in the library, right? So this was maybe my man, I think the best maybe 14 years ago, right? And my son, when I took him to when we were touring magnet schools, I was able to see in the media centers. I think when we started, it might have been wasn't Black History Month. There was something else going on. I'm not sure, but there were books around the media center that spoke to that month, and it was easy to recognize that there were things being acknowledged, and there were people that were actually paying attention and paying homage to certain heritage and histories through books. And that wasn't something that I saw 14 years ago when my daughter was going through kindergarten, when she was going through elementary school. I remember I had to ask them, like, y'all don't do nothing for Black History Month? Like,
Yikes.
y'all don't do nothing? Like I had to ask my daughter, I said, what do y'all know for Black History Month? And she was like, nothing. And I had to email the teacher, and she was like, no, we don't do anything for Black History Month. Like,
I'm curious,
you feel me?
the teachers or the media specialists, were they Black?
What? When Nyla was growing up?
Yes.
Or now?
Nyla.
When Nyla was growing up? No. No, not at all. Not at all. But the schools that we visited with Mace, some of those folks were Black, some of them were Latinx. They were all different, because we went to a couple of different schools, but this was specifically with Nyla when she was in school, like the school that she attended growing, like her elementary school, which oddly enough, the principal was Black at one point, her first year there, but that's a different story for a different day. So let's kind of move on a little bit, and because I know that during the pandemic we saw schools and educators having to shift to virtual learning, and that the pandemic took a toll on a lot of things. Like, I talked to a lot of teachers and a lot of educators who talk about learning loss during the pandemic. How has your work, specifically with what you were doing with the virtual village show, how did you kind of like adapt to the pandemic and kind of maintain engagement in literacy and education and the effectiveness of the work that you do?
I have to say, with all due sensitivity to what everybody experienced during that time, it was a miraculous, a beautiful time for our organization, because prior to the pandemic, just a few months before the pandemic, we had started using StreamYard to interview Black authors. And I became familiar with this technology. And once the pandemic hit, Initially, if you guys remember, I don't know how it was everywhere else, but here in Hampton Roads, it was a 2 week thing. It was like the schools are going to be shut down for 2 weeks. And that's what, people left thinking it was going to be. And
Right.
I reached out to a friend who was on the school board, and I'm distraught because I'm like, how are our babies going to eat? And what's going to happen? Because, some of them depend on lunch, school for breakfast and lunch. And, we have this whole conversation. It's like, slow down, calm down. And we came up with the idea of doing the read-in. And it started out as a read-in. And what we did, we had a sign-in mechanism. And we came on and we started talking to people about the fact that they could come in and sign up. So at first, school board member and we came on in the late morning and in the evening, and we read Black children's books. And then we made it where people could sign up and come on to read, and a community was built. Remember, at this point, everybody was shut in and nobody knew
Mm-hmm.
what was really going on. And so
Mm-hmm.
people really started tuning in, and it became the virtual village because we always have that village mentality. And so people really built bonds around Black children's literature. We had parents, grandparents, we had principals, assistant principals, news anchors. We had children in other states. We had children in other states become friends with our children because people became regulars coming on to read, and literally a sense of community was built. People were tuning in to watch this and to participate in this. And it was a beautiful thing that evolved into a show in which we we had young people who became like stars of the show.
Mm-hmm.
It was virtual with it was live, and then we had pre-recorded segments that was like moments in history, Sankofa time. We had teachers who came on and did foundational literacy lessons, and then it evolved into a show that was hosted by children for children. The literacy game was born, and it was just beautiful. And we really pushed the limits of what StreamYard could do because it literally turned into a show with an opener and a theme song. We had commercials where we were support like Black businesses were able to have, pre-recorded commercials. And it was beautiful. Community came together. And so we had to pivot. To answer your question, we had to pivot. Instead of being
Mm-hmm.
like, everything is closed down, we can't do anything. It was like, how can we take advantage of what we have in the moment, and then how can we even push it to do something that serves our children and serves our community in a creative and effective way. And so
Mm-hmm.
again, like, it was a very magical time. It was like straight community time, and I really enjoyed it. And a lot of our children were we're all about high expectations for Black children because we understand that as long as we have these high expectations and they're backed by love and belief in our children, that they can and they will meet those expectations. So some children found their voices by coming on and reading during that time. And then our young people who were hosts of the show, and then the ones who became guest readers of the show. And they would love to see the comments down at the bottom where the
Mm-hmm.
grown people would be like, oh, you are doing an amazing job. And the feedback that they got, because some of them, the ones who were readers, you would see them reading, but then they peek up to look at the comment. And one
Right.
of the
Right.
most
Right.
beautiful things, I had a parent to tell me, it was like a month ago. He texted me and said, every now and then, I go into my son's room and I see him like, in the computer, and I'm like, what's going on? And he's going back and watching the clip of when he was on the show, and he was
Mm.
crying. It was like, because the way you all affirmed him and the people in the comment section affirmed him. And so this was in 2020 or 2021, it had to be. And he's like, my son goes back and just looks at this periodically, and he'll have tears in his eyes. And I'm like, and so that's the village. So we appreciate, we pivoted, but the village was a part of that. The village was supportive, and the way grown people came and affirmed our babies when they were reading, and all the, how we do. Yes, baby, you got it, baby. You got all
Right.
of that in
Right.
the
Take
chat.
take your time. Take your
Take
time.
your time, you got it.
Right.
And all of that was so amazing. So the power in the village, the power in love. We talk. I talk a lot about when it comes to Black children, what I call guerrilla love. You know, we've heard of guerrilla war
Mm-hmm.
tactics, where you just, you
Mm-hmm.
know, you get gangster with it. Just, you know, no rules. Guerrilla love is just, we're gonna love on you. You know what I'm saying? We
Mm.
are going to make sure that we show love and value, and that you know that you are valued. And so our village came on, and you know, it was an extension of those values that we have, because everybody understood that and everybody felt that. So that was our
Mhm.
pandemic experience.
Right, right. And so let's talk about when folks donate books, right? When they donate the culturally affirming books to the organization, is or even the books that you were reading during the virtual read-ins. How do you select the literature, and is there a certain criteria that it must meet?
So it's very interesting that you say that. We prefer, people want to donate books a lot, and we have a list. And so if you pull books off that list, that is fine. But otherwise, just donating books, not really a fan of that, because I'm very meticulous about um, what's in those books.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look and make sure. So 90, probably 98% of the books that we use have Black authors. But even within that, we go and we look through it. Like one time, there was a book that was offered to me, and it was about. So I noticed within the book that it was about some little boys, and the little girls that they liked, or the little girls that they favored, were all of a lighter skin tone,
Mm-hmm.
or were not Black, and the
Mm-hmm.
ones who were just kind of there were darker skinned. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
Aunt X, you know, no disrespect or anything like that, but we have to be very careful of the messages that we are sending. So we look for things like that. Is it affirming all the way around? Is it, you know, does it go into stereotypes or tropes that we know are not progressive, that are not safe or helpful or affirming for our children? So we look at that. We look at, you know, what it's about, all of these different things. And that's very, is it accurate? There was a book one time that I got from the library, and it was about Dr. King. And basically, in the middle, because this was something that I was doing years ago with a partner. And as I'm reading the book, it was basically saying, like, you know, Dr. King, he marched, he went to Chicago, and, you know, after he did that, racism was over and everything was fine. And literally, as I'm reading this book to the children, y'all know how Duck on the Five Heartbeats, when he was playing the piano and JT was like, nah, come on, man, come on. And Duck was like, nah, this my music, JT. He was like, nah. And so I'm reading this book and I'm like, So I stopped right in the middle, and we had a lesson on revisionist history. And so with some of my elementary students, we talked about what revisionist history is,
Mm-hmm.
how to look out for that. And it was like pause, and it was like, yeah, we can't finish this book. And I
Mm-hmm.
talked a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about the realities of, you know, what it was. So no revision, and it was a Black author, and it was also a relative of Dr. King. I think it was his niece
Wow.
who wrote the book. But I was like,
Wow.
you know, hey niece, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not the way that it happened. I don't know who
Right.
or what made you feel like that's the way that story should be told, but we're not today, not today.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, those types of things are incredibly important. We have to be very mindful. And again, having children, it causes us, so anti-Blackness is rampant around the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And anti-Blackness, it doesn't mean that Black people are not susceptible to anti-Blackness. If you think about it, if you think about what it actually is and who it was done to, who was, you know, like the target of it. And so we always have to check our anti-Blackness ometer and make sure that we are not on that scale. So we have to, you know, as parents, as mentors, as educators, as any of these things, community leaders, we have to make sure that we are not perpetuating those things in any types of ways. So as we go through these books, these are things that we're looking out for.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about checking our what did you say? Anti-blackometer?
Anti-blacknessometer. Yeah.
Anti-blacknessometer. Okay, let's dive into that a little bit. Tell us how does one check their anti-blacknessometer? Give me the steps for checking that. Is it like checking your oil? Is it like every 5,000 miles? Is it every 500 black people you meet? Like what do you do? How do you get there?
So it could be a daily thing, because once you sit back and think about it, because we've been taught that a lot of black things are negative, or they are less than, they are sub, the classics. If we're talking about art, if we're talking about music, it's not, because we're urban. We
Mhm.
get thrown, and I don't think that categorizing our things as black or anything, that there's anything wrong with that. But the problem becomes when it's made to be sub, when it's less than. So if we
Mhm.
buy into those beliefs or tropes that anything is less than because it's black, then that is, your anti-blackness ometer. You want it like on zero, but it is coming over, it's coming over. And so
Mhm.
that's a way to think about that. I'll tell you one thing, because I feel like, I'm pretty good with this. I'm not above somebody if somebody talks to me and says, possibly that I missed something. We all should be teachable, but I think I'm pretty good with it. But one thing that I knew one time, I was like, you're doing this with names. You're doing it with names. And while I will say that there can be some things sometimes that have been outlandish, I also think that about, white names or traditional names, that some of those things are ugly or weird or whatever. But there's this book right here, and it's called Your Name is a Song. And I was so glad to find Your Name is a Song. And I was so glad to find this because, I found this years after I had this conversation in my head about the names. But a lot of the names that people will call ghetto or whatever is run, Shaniqua, whatever, you pick a name, pick a black,
Mhm.
Jamonte, whatever. I'm like, but that's it's rhythmic. It's unique to us. Why, if it's unique to us, does it mean that there's something wrong with it? Or when people
Mhm.
choose to pick names that may have a calling back to Africa or such things. But even some of the names that are Black American names, the way they flow, it's almost like it sounds like some of those names. And so I'm like, here's a beautiful lens to look at that. People are out here naming their kids Apple. If some of these names, like, of course, I'm not going to think of it because I'm talking about it right now, but some of those names that we've been taught to look at because it came from other people, that, oh, that's distinct, or that's,
Axl Rose.
yeah, yes, like all of these things, and because it comes from other people, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
that's a beautiful name, or that's a unique name, or that's a whatever name. And I'm like, but I'm so here for Davion. I'm so here for that. Like, why is that a problem? Why do
Mhm.
we automatically feel like that the things that we come up with, that there is something wrong with us? With it. We allow people to make us feel that way. Now, like I said, just like I think names from other people, some of them can be like, okay, I don't like that. There are some names with us, but I think some of us just have a thing that if it is something that by any way it can be identified that it is a black person, then it is negative. And I would say that on your anti-blackometer, challenge yourself. Why do I feel that way? Why do
Mm.
I feel that way? How does that serve me? How does that serve my community? Also, how does that make me treat people or children who have those names? Do
Right.
I, as a black person, have any preconceived notions if I have a list of kids or kids who come up to me and their names are Nevea or whatever, Princess?
Samaj.
Yes, yes, yeah, like, because these are names of children in our community. And so I'm
Mhm.
like, if you cringe, just automatically, like, where's that coming from? Why? Of course, we have anti-blackness. The obvious things are colorism, featureism, texturism, all of these isms that have been placed upon us, and challenging ourselves. If you've ever joke people you so black, you'll complain, and
Right.
especially if you saying it to a child. Because I would
Right.
tell you what, I'm a peaceful person. I want peace. But if you try to assassinate the self-esteem of a black child, I don't care who you are. I'm going to intervene. So if you hit with the you so black, your hair so nappy, get out the you need to get out the sun,
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, and I'm around. I'm older now, so I'm better at, having a conversation about it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, sis, or hey,
Calling in instead of
right,
calling out.
and calling in. Yes, like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
let's talk about this. But it's things, and so here's the thing, really. Anybody who's saying that, it was said to them or around them.
Right. Right.
And
Absolutely.
so just going back and thinking about how did that make you feel, or if you were not the one that it was being said to, maybe you were the one who had the desired hair texture, but it was being
Mm-hmm.
said to your siblings or your cousins or friends around you. Are you listening to that? Are you thinking about how that made you feel? Or if it was said to you, are you thinking about how it made you feel? And instead of recycling that and putting that on other children, there's a different way to do it. So that's that anti-blackness ometer, to think about that, because we want our children to be healthy, we want them to be affirmed, we want them to love who they are, and we want them to value our community. We want them, I feel that they need to have a sense of responsibility. So if the community is treating them in ways in which they are not valuable, then that sense of community is not going to be there. And I
Mm-hmm.
also talk about, anti-blackness could be if you see black teenagers and you're automatically scoffing, or you have some, fear that comes over you. Because I try to
Mm-hmm.
make a point to speak to black teenagers when I'm out and about. Hey, how y'all doing? Even when I've seen them places where I feel like they shouldn't be, like, hey, how y'all doing? What's going on? And I've not been cursed out. I've not
Like a
had,
true auntie. Like a true auntie.
and I've been an auntie since I was like 20,
Right.
and so I have not had a negative experience, thus far. Even when I have seen them sometimes in situations that we know are not becoming, whether it's thing, and it's not always, they're not always doing things that are not becoming. But if we allow ourselves to associate that with black youth, because guess what? Don't act like you didn't curse.
Right. Right. Right.
Even if you were just testing the water with some things that you were doing. And don't act like that teenagers don't make mistakes. Like, what is our role as an adult? Is it for us to expect for teenagers to be perfect?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or is it for us to guide them? And so when
Mm-hmm.
I've seen them sometimes, when I'm able and they're doing things that might not be, that are not the best for them to do, I'm like, yeah, I'm looking at you and you are beautiful. And I'm really shocked. Or you are so handsome, like you are so capable, your presence. And I'm really shocked at the things that are coming out of your mouth, because I see brilliance in you. And I'm like, what's coming out your mouth is not matching, what I see. And I know you're capable of, and so like that way. Or what I'm seeing you're behind, and I'm trying to understand, like, just having conversations in that type of way instead of scoffing at them. Like, when we believe in black children, when we value black children, when we love black children, when we protect them, and when we understand how important they are, it can change the trajectory of how we interact with them. And so again, if it's automatically disdain, because if we've talked about, if adults are saying and doing things that are negative, then that's that. I mean, some of it is just young people being young, and then other is modeling. And so maybe they've not had any, not maybe, a lot of times they have not had anybody to come in and approach it from a place of love. That's where the
Mm-hmm.
guerrilla love came from, because I've seen it. I've seen kids, literally be stunned, like in stopped in their tracks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Dr.
see,
Adolph said he was cursing at the age of 5, and now he's a professor. Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. That's a fact. So you touched on something, and now now that I think I'll say that we are the youngest elders that the world has ever seen, right? Because like we the old heads now. Like me and you are roughly the same age. You're a little bit older than me. But
Child,
you
1 year. Okay, stop it.
know, but we are the, it seems like, back in the days, our aunties and uncles, like they were like going bald at 27 and they had the George Jefferson and they were, they just looked a little different. You know what I mean? I don't think they were as cool as we are now at 40 plus. Do you think that there is a certain, I don't want to say responsibility, but do you think there is a certain, um, I guess we will say responsibility that we have, to balance the two, because we grew up in an age of hip hop, like we grew up in an age of, Snoop Dogg, Gin and Juice, and DMX and Jay Z. Like we grew up in that era, and I tell people when it comes to music and culture, what they're seeing now is just an extension of that. People, and this is a different conversation. We start talking about people like Sexy Red and some of the artists that are out now. I always argue that they're just an extension of who we are. So do you think that we as the old heads now have a responsibility to, um, be as tough on this generation as our parents were on us, or should we have a little bit more grace?
So it's funny that you brought that up because I was kind of wondering if that would seep into this conversation. And one of the weirdest things to me, so I have critiques about the current state of hip hop and music overall, but I've
Mhm,
had critiques on hip hop for a while. And so it's
mhm,
really growing up being a head, being a hip hop head and loving getting my first, hip hop tape when I was in the fourth grade when I tricked that same granny into buying me the Great Adventures of Slick Rick. So understand
mhm.
the critiques come from somebody who loves black culture and has been in, was just in awe, like literal awe of hip hop as a youngin, like just awe of them. And so like oh my gosh. But nonetheless, I find it really weird when people our age are. I've seen debates on in threads on Instagram, and people will talk about Sexy Red, and then somebody jumps in there and says something about Lil Kim, Foxy Brown, and you will see people our age argue them down that those people
Mhm.
have nothing to do with it. And I'm
I
like,
saw it
how
yesterday. I saw it yesterday.
Sway? What are you
Mhm,
talking about? Like
mhm.
they gave birth to that. Also because this is such a nuanced conversation, because we can't just talk about, the women and what they're doing that we don't like without talking about murder music.
But
Um,
let's stop right there. Let's stop right there for 1 second, because the argument specifically with Sexy Red and with people like Ice Spice and this new generation of women hip hop stars, it's only because they're women. It's only because they're women. You don't hear anybody having these same conversations about Too Short. You don't hear anybody having these same conversations about Snoop Dogg when he was walking the women
we
down the red
love them.
carpet with the chains.
Uncle
You
Snoop.
don't hear those conversations. And when you hold people's feet to the fire and say, okay, well, we can say what we want to say about Sexy Red, but are you willing to throw away all of your Snoop Dogg music? Are you willing to throw away all your Biggie music? Are you willing to throw away all of your Jay-Z and DMX CDs and downloads and all of that stuff? They say no. And my argument is always, if you're not willing to disregard that, if you're not willing to snub your nose at that, then let these kids have their music.
You are so right. And of course, we are on the same page. And, another thing I saw a while ago, it was a City Girls clip. And this was when I first started noticing these conversations. And men were in the comments like, this is the end of our community. And I was like, you look older than me. And so I was like, you were a part of Two Live Crew, that
Yeah.
time frame. And Dame Dash and them when they had the lick and they're
Hmm.
pouring it up. So as long as men are the ones objectifying women, it's okay.
It's
But if
cool. It's cool.
women take on the behavior, and then when they're baffled as to why women do it, I'm like, what's the Tupac acronym NIGGAS? What was that? What did that
Oh
stand for?
gosh, I can't remember. I
So
can't.
anyway,
You're
when
asking me, and I can't
people a
remember.
lot
Right.
of times when people are oppressed in ways, they find a way to push back against, they'll claim. they'll take on, you will see in a lot of marginalized communities where people will take on the name, the characteristics in which the people who were in control put on them. They reclaim it. So people understand that with, Black men and the N word. So when you constantly listening to music and you're Black, you are part of the culture, you like the beat, you like the, just the creativity and everything around it, but it's constantly be this, H that, all of these different things. So then the women started saying, well, I'll own that. You won't come. And so whether we agree with that or not, Dr. JL is Dr.
Okay, hold
JL
on
to
it.
the
Never
rescue.
ignorant, getting goals accomplished. He on it. He on it. Thank you,
He
sir.
is on it. Okay. Okay. I love it. I love it. Because we both had we forgot.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, we may not agree with these things, but understand the psychology and the sociology behind human behavior. So we get it when men do it, but we don't get it when women do it.
Mhm.
But back
Mhm.
to your original question. So I feel like we have to have grace, even within our critiques. It's always easier when you are talking to somebody about something and you're like, well, I've experienced this, or I've been a part. Like, let me tell you something, okay? So my story, that when I moved here to Virginia, I was 12 and I lived with my dad. And I
Mhm.
was raised by my dad was always in my life, but from that point on, I was raised by my dad. So I had my dad in the house, but very much involved. Reggie Armstrong didn't play, and Reggie Armstrong loved me. But when hardcore came out, I just was like, that's crazy. I was like, I cannot believe this stuff is being said.
That's
And
crazy.
because of that, and by just being a teenager, I listened to it. I had it. I don't think he heard it, but because of the home environment that I had, that's what it was. It was music, and that was it. But I knew every line, and I still know every line. So I
Right.
can't be a hypocrite to anybody about that. Do I wish, that things were different? Do I feel converse? Here's the biggest thing that this generation has is social media. We didn't have that. So you
Right.
actually had to get the tape or you had to get the CD. And if it was either played on the radio or it wasn't, or, if you saw a video, and a lot of times those things were edited. But now everything just gets put out and it's in a constant cycle over and over and over again. And it's easier for a self-made person to, come out, which has its positives and its negatives. But it's just we're inundated with that in a
Mhm.
way that did not happen to us. And of course, the conversation about balance that is not there.
Right.
So,
Right.
for Lil Kim, there's Rod Digger,
Right.
and
Right.
Lauren
Which
Hill
is
and
a which is a totally different argument than arguing about the artist, right? Because my point has always been, recently since the Sexy Red conversations have started, is that as we get older, our ears become more conservative. Like I can't listen to the same things at 43 and enjoy them that I did at 23 because I live a different life, right? And society has changed, like societal norms have changed. So when Sexy Red says when she when she says her, I'm not even gonna say because it's a very very family friendly podcast. When she says her lyrics, the song that got her famous, that's no different than what Lil Kim said back in the day when she said the songs that made us go in awe. It's the same meaning, right? It's the same meaning. The body is the same. There's no different body parts that you can rap about. Like nobody created new body parts in the last 25 years. There's nothing new under the sun. It's just that as we've gotten older, our ears are more conservative. And I think with Sexy Red, I think she gets a bad rap. And I think a lot of it when it comes from black folks, it's based in it's definitely based in sexism because she's a woman, but it's also based in colorism, right? A lot of it is based when they look at her, they don't see the quote unquote pretty girl with the light eyes and the blonde hair. Like they don't see that when they see her. She is herself and she is authentically herself in every space that she walks in. And all I can do is appreciate that and understand that she don't make music for me. Like I'm not a 19-year-old kid. I'm 43. Like she shouldn't be making music for me because that's just I, I listen to Nas.
That is the one thing that I can say I appreciate about her. No disrespect, no hard feelings to anybody, but if this is your thing, but in a world of BBLs and just a lot of trying feeling the pressures of having to look a certain way, she has
Right.
not succumbed to that. And so that's the only thing that I could say that I do notice about her that I like. Some of the other arguments that I saw that were insane to me was that, well, Lil Kim had talent, Foxy Brown had talent, they could spit. And I was like, so are you saying if you feel like if she could spit better, that the song you were talking about, like if that was the theme, but she executed it in a way that was more
Right.
to your liking, she was a better
Exactly. It's all
lyricist, then
subjective. All
you
subjective.
wouldn't have like cap, and I don't even use that word, but
All
cap,
cap. All
like
cap.
all cap, like stop playing. And so, I mean, I have things that I will say about it if I'm called to a conversation about it, but with balance and with an understanding. Like, so the generation before always has to take a responsibility for what comes with the generation behind us. So here's the thing that we did not do, that our generation did not do. Now, we used to have a program called the Hip Hop Youth Initiative. And in that program, we taught the 5 elements of hip hop. And we showed, gosh, now I can't think of what the movie was that we showed the our youth. And then after that, so and then they watched self-destruction and we're all in the same game. And we had
Hmm.
conversations around that. And then they
And you
had to
remade self destruction.
huh?
You remade self destruction.
They did. So
They
they
did. Right.
had to come up with, they had to decide which element they wanted to be a part of in the boot camp, and they received instruction. And then they had to come together and create a song that represented their generation, that had the weight, that had the same weight of self destruction over all in the same gang. And, we also did a play and a project around it, but we had a couple of classes of that. And so the thing is, we have to teach the culture. It's up to us to make the culture valued and respected. And I think if we did not do that, but then we're mad because young people are not doing that, like who was supposed to do that? Who was the person that was supposed to make them understand
Us.
that? If they weren't
Us.
born and they didn't know, if we didn't do it, that's on us. And so as
Hmm.
I'm talking to a younger generation about things to consider, things to think about, I have to insert us. I can't just act like y'all, like I say our parents' generation did not do the best job overall of talking about our history and the responsibility that we have, because they were the post civil rights generation. And I think with them having gone through a lot of things that they did, or even their parents kind of were like, and then they were like, I don't want I don't want to weigh them down, or maybe there was trauma, whatever the reasons were, but they a lot overall didn't push that the way that they should have. So now you get, what you got. And I think we did an all right job with that. We had the conscious hip hop era. We had a lot of different things going on in which we tried, we had our time and our mark in that. But this whole hip hop thing, if we are pointing fingers and we're not taking responsibility, it's just weird to me, and it's lazy and
Hmm.
it's irresponsible.
I agree. I agree 100%. So since I didn't intend for this to turn into a conversation about culture and hip hop, but I should have known with you that that's the direction that it was going to go. So let's stay here for a minute and let's talk about how in education, right? How can teachers, how can educators use this type of conversation and this type of content that we're referring to in their pedagogy? Like, how can they use it in um, encouraging kids to read and encouraging kids to pick up a book and encouraging kids to further their educational journey? How do you think they can use culture in that quest?
So, question: are you talking about using the things that we're saying we don't feel serve the community or our youth? Or are you saying how can they make that positive, or like
I'm
clarify
sa-
for
I'm
me?
s- I'm saying how can they use hip hop culture, which our hip hop culture that we grew up on is totally different from what the kids are growing up on now. how can they use hip hop culture as it is today to assist with their pedagogy?
So I would just, say use the beats when I do it. However, when I've done that, I'm teaching them about the classics
Hmm.
and making that interesting, and also helping them understand samples that, but teaching about hip hop, because where's the
Hmm.
lesson in hip hop? And then infusing that in ways. I see a lot of people doing this on Instagram where they're infusing the music in lessons that they have.
Hmm.
And that's always a beautiful thing. I think we've been doing that with music for a long time, and our children are receptive to that. But as they get, I mean, I just think teaching the culture, which means going back to the classics, is always an important thing to do. We have that responsibility, because going back to what I said, we know when people start talking about the classics and the greats, they're often not talking about us. So let's make sure that we are having those conversations, and not in a way like you don't know real music, but just like, hey, let me introduce y'all to, or when samples that are, when samples are being sampled, like infusing that and having those particular conversations, because we don't want our culture to die.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
it's on a slow death if we're not. That goes for R&B and like all elements of our music. And if we're talking about music right now, so infuse those things, and usually kids will get excited about it. Like, it was before my time, but I love 70s. Like I love music from the 70s as well as the 80s. And I'll, but wake up everybody, and the kids will get into it. They will,
Hmm.
because that can't die. It can't die. And that's the same thing with hip hop. Okay, those are things that gave, but even that music from the 70s, that's where all the hip hop samples came from that we grew up on. So if we really value our culture, like take a moment and get into it and get them
Hmm.
into it. And a lot of times when I'm listening to music on YouTube, I'm a comment reader. So I'll go and read comments sometimes, and I see so many people who are like, I'm 12 and I love this music.
Hmm.
I'm 21, I'm 16, and this is my favorite. So whether it's hip hop, or whether, like I said, I've time traveled, as I called it, back to the 70s or the 80s or whatever, or even the 60s. I'm a lover of Black music. I'm a lover of music, period. But I'm a lover and a champion of Black music. And so incorporate that. Have fun with that. What we talk about a lot of time, remember on Saturdays when it was time to clean up,
Hmm. Hmm.
do it in the home. Take it, like, do a time travel. Do a time
But
travel.
also,
And again, don't be condescending.
hmm but also, I think it's important to understand and to teach there are other elements of hip hop besides just the MC, right? I think you could use things like DJing. I think you can use things like b-boying. I think you can definitely use things like graph writing. Like all of those elements can be infused to your point to let the kids know um, what makes hip hop special, because this is the only genre of music that has more than just one element, right? It's a culture. KRS said it best. It's what you do, right? It's not what you do, it's who you are. And I think that's important to understand. Dr. Adolph said he uses modern hip hop to discuss hard topics about misogyny, women's sexuality, empowerment, and social media presence in his English courses. Use this to inspire students to read Shakespeare, Baldwin, and Morrison. And I think again that's important, especially in literacy. I think their studies have been shown that when you infuse hip hop in your pedagogy, in your curriculum, specifically at a middle and high school age, that kids are doing better on their test scores. There are schools in Detroit. There's a program in New York that I could cite that all have infused hip hop culture and hip hop music into their curriculum, and now they are seeing numbers off the charts for their test scores. So I think that's important to meet these students where they are. So
So
go ahead, Clever.
we go back to being culturally affirming, and definitely I agree with what you said about the elements, because like I said, in our hip hop youth initiative, we taught all five of the elements. I would say that even in R&B, though, it's not called elements, but there's more than one, because there's the singer. But before we went into the 80s, there were bands. there were whole
Mhm.
bands with,
Mhm.
sections, the horn section, the percussion section, and so that's important as well, because that taps into, all different things that children can be interested in, but nonetheless, and what the doc said is extremely important as we get with our older children, to be able to have these conversations. And also what we want are free thinkers, critical thinkers is what we want. So when we're
Mhm.
able to have the conversations like such as he said, and juxtapose things and throw things out there and correlate things, that is extremely important. But what we want to raise are critical thinkers. So yeah.
Yeah, that's dope. That's dope. So since we're running out of time, let's kind of close out with just a question about what your organization is doing, how people can get involved with helping what it is that you're doing, and just talking about what y'all got coming up.
So we talked about Read to Lead. We also have a middle school book club that we just started, and that is called the Literacy Gang Book Club. And our first book that we did, and we're gonna rerun this one, is Victory Stand, and it's about Tommy Smith and Carlos, and the 1968 Olympics. And we've all, seen this. Even the children have seen that fist salute. It's on a lot of paraphernalia, but most
Mhm.
people don't know. A lot of people don't know what that was actually about. So, and the author, New York Times bestselling author, highly decorated author, is a friend of the organization, Derek Barnes. He has a lot of excellent children's books to check out if you have children. So there's the Literacy Gang Book Club. There is also the Law Scholars Program for teenagers, that is LAAW, which stands for Literacy as a Weapon. And we use the book The Color of Law, one of our only books that's not by a Black author, but it talks about how the government used housing discrimination to create a white middle class. So
Mm.
redlining, zoning,
Redlining, right?
various
Yeah,
forms
yeah.
of housing discrimination. And with the New Deal and other policies that were passed to create this white middle class through home ownership, but simultaneously locked Black people out of that, which created generational wealth for them and not for us. And it has so much to do with the disparities that we see in a lot of our communities versus other communities, and where Black children who become Black adults and just people overall see those disparities and think there's just something inherently wrong with us, when they don't know the lengths that the government went to create those disparities and to,
Mhm.
dismantle these bootstrap narratives. And so we have teenagers, we read this book, we dissect this book, we bring in experts, we do mapping, all of these different things. And then our first group, they interview people who had experienced these things. Our group this past summer, they had a podcast because we did the correlation between redlining and gun violence. And they interviewed
Mm.
people who had real firsthand experience with gun violence for a podcast, which will be coming out sometime in the future. I'll keep people abreast of that. It's being edited now. But they have gone on to be like change agents. They have gone on to speak out. Speaking of book bans, they come in quiet and timid and creating that safe space where you're like, your voice is worthy of being heard. And they understand that. So they blossom. And they now, have spoke at school board meetings against book bans. They have organized their peers. They have passed proposed bills to the General Assembly against food insecurity that got passed. They are activists. They have a lot. They've gone on to college, and their majors have been based upon. We have some urban planners. We have like some are going into film, but everything is about the responsibility that they know they have towards the community and the information that they learn. So they are organizers, and they have this information at a young age, and they are out there in the world. So we're excited. This is a summer program, and we're looking forward to our next class of law scholars, and we'll be promoting that program soon, getting ready for the summertime. And so those are our programs. If you would like to support our work, I have on there that on Instagram we can be found at CCA_org. Our website is clevercommunities.org. If you would like to be on our newsletter, you can send us a DM or email us admin@clevercommunities.org, and we'll add you to our mailing list. And also, if you would like to support our work, then you can go to clevercommunities.org and make a donation. Or I'll tell you all the ways, because community support means everything. So our Cash App is Clever Communities. And our PayPal is donations@clevercommunities.org. But you can go directly to our website, clevercommunities.org, if you want to sow, a seed into the work that we do. But also, we appreciate the feedback. Follow us, tell people about us, interact with us. And yeah, if you were moved by any of this, I definitely appreciate it.
Well, thank you for gracing us with your presence, ma'am. This is definitely a very awesome conversation. I got to shout out Jamie West, who said that she appreciated hearing our perspectives. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank
So yeah,
you.
if you want to get more of Dads in the Class, the podcast is available on all platforms. If you want to check out the previous 6 episodes, be sure to check us out on YouTube under the Glad Dads page. Just share, like, and subscribe, and help us get this message of fatherhood and family engagement out to the masses, to as many people as we can. Other than that, Starr Armstrong, thank you for joining us on the show for this episode, ma'am. I will
Thank you for
definitely be
having me.
inviting you back. You have a great story. I wanted to dive into your story, more of your story about being raised by your dad, because of course it's his dad's in the class. But whenever the conversation of hip hop and culture comes up, I kind of get lost in the sauce. So we'll have you back to talk about that, and to talk about dads and how we can engage fathers in the work that you're doing and the work that I'm doing. But super dope episode, and we'll see y'all next week. Peace.
Yeah.